everybody. Good afternoon. Hi, my name's Mike Clegg, and I'm the dean of the school. And it's my pleasure to welcome you, Steve Terrett and D.A. Henderson, to this happy celebration this afternoon. So the first thing I have to tell you is Scott McVicker made me promise to tell you that this is being videotaped, okay? So, Scott, is that okay? Okay, good. And so it's a happy day. We're all here to honor and celebrate Professors Tim and Sue Baker. And there's lots of great people in the audience, old friends I haven't seen for a long time, people connected with the school. I do want to recognize D.A. Henderson, who's the 8th dean of the school, the dean emeritus, and Jill Sommer, who's here representing Al, and Al is on a plane, but we'll get here sometime later tonight. Thank you for coming. So, some faculty think I travel too much, some faculty think I travel too little, but whenever I travel and I go around the world, the one faculty member people ask me about is Tim Baker. And he seems to have touched every student who's ever been through these doors, and you can see why they feel so affectionate and loving towards you, Tim. I mean, because Tim is a generous person. He's free with his advice, and sometimes whimsical advice, and sometimes a joke. But he reaches out to everybody. And when I was a student, I didn't get to meet Tim, but I did meet Sue, and I remember. She was a guest lecturer in a course that I was taking, and she came and she spoke about her work on airline injuries and airline crashes. And I can remember her showing a 2x2 table and impressing on us how important data are and how much work it had been to get that 2x2 table, and then the impact it had on the world. So I'm especially pleased to be here in this role today to welcome both of you. In addition to being extraordinary human beings, they have a long list of public health accomplishments, and it's part of my job to read some of those, but I'll make it mercifully short for both of you. Tim joined the School of Hygiene and Public Health in 1960. He was hired as an associate professor in the Department of Public Health Administration and as an assistant dean for the school, and he remained an assistant dean for 7 years. His talent was obvious, and he soon became acting director of what was then a new division of International Health, which eventually became the Department of International Health. And as many of you know, and if you don't, Bob Black will be happy to fill you in on the details, that department is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. So it's particularly fitting that we're having this celebration for Tim during the anniversary year of the department. And just a few years after Tim started, Sue was hired as a computer programmer for research projects in the Department of Chronic Diseases. Sue soon began to conduct some of the earliest research anywhere on children dying in car crashes. And by 1979, her work led to many states adopting child restraint laws, which have saved many lives. She developed an injury severity score, which has become a standard tool for clinicians and researchers to measure the severity of injury. And then in 1970, Tim was appointed full professor in the Department of International Health with joint appointments in the Department of Health Policy and Management and Environmental Sciences. Through his distinguished career, more than 5 decades, he's conducted research in more than 40 countries. His work on health planning, evaluation of health services, and assessment of disease and injury burden have led to numerous publications and influenced public health policy around the globe. Meanwhile, Sue's work, which began in the nascent field of injury prevention, included a call on the U.S. government to establish a federal center for injury control. The idea was to establish a federal body to sponsor research and fund centers of excellence to focus on injury prevention. After she and her colleagues made this recommendation and published the book, Injury in America, Sue went on to secure a grant from the CDC to establish one of the first centers in the country. This, of course, is our very own Center for Injury Research and Policy, which happens to be celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. Sue was the center's first director, so it's fitting that on this 25th anniversary of the center, we're here to celebrate Sue and her work. Together, Tim and Sue have spent more than 100 years, hard to believe, yeah. Working to improve the health of people in the U.S. and the world. In addition to their teaching, research, and mentoring of students, they have established 6 student scholarships and a professorship at the school. As Dean of the school, I want to thank you both for your tremendous contributions and for being the people who you are. It's an honor to have you as colleagues and friends. I'm going to introduce a video clip of Tim and Sue, and after that video, Dr. Ellen McKenzie, who's the Soper Professor and Chair of the Department of Health Policy and Management, will advance to the podium to say a few words. This 3-minute clip is from the school's oral history project, recorded in 2008. I think you'll catch a glimpse of Tim and Sue, how they interact with each other, their wonderful relationship, and how Sue is the gatekeeper of Tim's jokes. So please roll the video.
How did I get started in public health? Well, it was an accident, and I decided that I wanted to go into international health, and I wanted to go to far-off lands and talk to John Hume, and he said, well, you got to learn something about public health first, so get yourself a residency in public health, and then come take an MPH, and that was in 1954. And Sue?
Well, I was married to public health by that time. I mean, I got into the field 10 years after Tim, when I had finished raising, well, not finished raising the children, but they were all in school at that point. Tim came home one day and I was out in the garden. He said, you may be getting the weeds out of the garden, but you've got weeds growing in your brain. And I think he figured that I could do things that were more useful for humanity. And at any rate, that night I heard about a job in computer programming with Abe Lilienfeld, who was head of the Department of Chronic Diseases. And he said, you know, go take a course. There's one starting tomorrow at the school. So I took the course in computer programming and started working for Abe and getting involved in public health research. It's neat to have someone you can brainstorm with over a problem, either a research problem or a kind of political problem, like how am I going to get so-and-so to agree to do such and such, but where we both know the people involved, the problems involved, and have some idea for potential solutions. I mean, it means we get a lot of work done going back and forth in the car, so that we're greatly extending our opportunities for thinking about whatever we're working on.
You know, this one of the things about this session has made us appreciate how much a chance to work together in the same institution has meant to us. And I'm grateful to the leaders who avoided setting a policy about having 2 family members in the same organization. It's very helpful to have someone that you can try out an idea on. Sue mentioned jokes, and I would occasionally say, do you think I can tell a joke about the talking dog from West Texas? And Sue will say, no, no.
Too many people have heard that too many times.
Well, it's absolutely fantastic to be here, to honor both Sue and Tim. It's a wonderful occasion. When I was asked to say a few words about Sue, I said, oh, absolutely, of course, that's wonderful. And then they told me I had 3 to 5 minutes. Well, that's quite a challenge if you know a little bit about Sue and all she's done. But fortunately, most of you in this audience know Sue and what she has contributed to the school and what she has contributed to the public's health. So I'm not going to recite, and actually Mike has already done a very nice job of reciting some of her accomplishments, not all of her accomplishments. But I want to say that she has truly, truly made a difference in the lives of many, many people. The students that she has taught, the young faculty she has mentored, and the many, many people whose lives have been saved or lives have been altered, given her pioneering work in injury prevention and her steadfast commitment to the translation of research into policy and practice. I think that is what her real contribution is. And I would add that there is no single person that I can think of that has had a more significant impact on the field of injury prevention and control. Sue Baker created the field of injury prevention and control, and she continues to nurture it with tremendous passion. Sue is an accomplished scientist, a fearless advocate, a true public health practitioner, and a much revered teacher and mentor. I have been blessed to know her and to learn from her. She is a legend and a true public health hero. So for this occasion, and with the help of a few colleagues in the Center for Injury here at the School of Public Health, that as you know that Sue created, we came up with a bunch of, or a baker's dozen, I should say, of Sueisms. Things you would likely hear Sue say, or things that people would likely to say about Sue. So first, a couple that epitomize her approach to injury prevention. First is, injury is no accident. Seems obvious to us now, but Sue was one of the first to deliver this message. More and more people now get it. Injuries are preventable. In responding to critics and skeptics who say certain injury prevention interventions deprive us of our freedoms, Sue would question, well, whose freedom anyway? You will hear Sue say over and over again that in developing interventions that are going to work in the real world, you must make the safest way the easiest way. And perhaps what has made her most successful is her fearless attitude towards those who are reluctant to change and do the right thing. She has taught us all that if you are not making someone angry, you are not doing your job. Or, put another way, be the bad guy of the month, alluding to the most cherished of all her awards and accolades when she was named the bad guy of the month by Road Rider Motorcyclist magazine. And that really is her proudest achievement. Students have always been important and always have been important to Sue, and she has mentored countless numbers of students. So everyone knows that for Sue, students come first. In asking former students what they remember most about Sue, they smile, remembering their oral exams or those one-on-one meetings with Sue talking about their work or her work. Sue is always challenging students to think big and think critically. It is not unusual to hear her ask a student, so what's in the denominator? Making sure they have identified the appropriate population at risk. Or, do you really believe these data? And a favorite one that I heard from a few students was, this paper should be simplified. Above all, simplify. But in the end, what students remember most about Sue are her encouraging words, like, beautiful job, that's great, keep up the good work. Now, we all know Sue and Tim's love of gems and minerals, and here are a couple of Sue's favorites that encapsulate her approach to life and to work. Pressure, enough but not too much, makes diamond. Or, if you are gold, you will shine wherever you are. Now, just so you don't get the idea that Sue is all peaches and cream, I must share with you one of my favorite quotes from Sue. And it takes a little bit of explaining. Mike has already mentioned that one of Sue's greatest contributions to the field of injury prevention is the development of something called the Injury Severity Score, or the ISS. And this is a severity score to measure the severity of multiple injuries. Well, the ISS is based on something called the Abbreviated Injury Scale, or the AIS. So many years back, I went to her confused about something that one of our colleagues, and this individual is not in this room, I'm pretty certain of that, but he came to me and said something that made me very confused about the difference between AIS and ISS, and I didn't understand. So I went and said to Sue, you know, I'm confused. And she promptly told me not to listen to this person because he simply doesn't know his AIS from his ISS from his ASS. And I don't know if you remember that, Sue, but I do. So I will end this baker's dozen of Sueisms from a quote from a senior colleague in the field, who, in looking back at all Sue has done and all that Sue is, simply said, "My only regret is that I was too old to sit at her feet." And this is from Barry Pless. In the end, Sue's great legacy will be the many generations of accomplished injury researchers, advocates, and teachers she has fostered. We had wanted to actually develop a Sue Baker genealogy tree, but this quickly proved way too complicated and something we never could put on one slide. So instead, we opted for a very recent photograph. And this photograph shows her together with Carol Runyon, who is first-generation Sue Baker, who was a postdoc with Sue and is now a professor and director of the Injury Center at the University of North Carolina, and is now viewed as one of the leaders in the field of injury control. Next to her is Ginger Yang, who is second generation, who is a mentee of Carol Runyon's. And next to her is Erin Hayden, who is currently a doctoral student with Ginger Yang. Some have said that in one way or the other, Sue has mentored just about everyone in the field of injury prevention. And I was just talking to Flora Winston, another one of Sue's proteges, and she agreed with me completely. It's just truly amazing how many people Sue has touched and how big of an influence she has had on this field. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ahwa Lee, who is professor of epidemiology at Columbia University and is one of Sue's former students. Ahwa himself carries on the Sue Baker legacy in spades, and I can't think of anybody more appropriate to say a few words than Ahwa. Ahwa?
Well, as Alan suggested, over the years, Sue has trained hundreds of students. Her students are truly outstanding group if you consider the fact that the least talented guy who can hardly speak any English is still good enough to take an endowed professorship or chair at Columbia. While a slightly more talented guy named Steve Tyrrell has won several Golden Apples and is currently being the Associate Dean for Education at the best school of public health in the world. Last year, Dr. Carol Runyon of UNC Chapel published a commentary in injury prevention titled, "Who is Susan P. Baker?" Actually, you can Google that, "Who is Susan P. Baker?" and it's in the PubMed. I guess everyone in this audience has already known the answer, who is Susan P. Baker. And today I will ask a slightly different question. What makes Susan Baker Susan Baker? Well, as her student, I have pondered on that question for over 20 years, and I have not quite figured out the answer. But I think I do know part of the answer. So what makes Sue Baker Sue Baker? First, I think it's her scholarship. Sue is a scholar in her heart and soul. She has studied almost everything in the universe of injury and published hundreds of papers. Her most recent manuscript that has just been accepted for publication is about helicopter crashes related to oil and gas operations in the Gulf of Mexico. So last November at the APHA annual meeting in Denver, I went to meet with her in the convention center. The post sessions were held there. As you know, there were hundreds of posters presented by those enthusiastic students and young public health professionals. And in the middle of the large, energetic crowd stood Sue Baker, presenting her poster. side by side with those students. To me, that image is the vintage of Susan Baker, the quintessential scholar from the same old school of Rachel Carson and Virginia Apgar. Scholarship is defined as the quality of knowledge and learning shown by a scholar. I think Sue's scholarship has three distinctive elements. The first one is, of course, originality. Originality ranges from original data to original methods and to original ideas and original theories. Sue always goes for the highest level of originality. And if you read carefully, there is always something new and original in every single piece of paper she publishes. The second element in Sue's scholarship is simplicity, as Ellen eloquently suggested in her introduction. I think Sue is the most faithful practitioner of Occam's razor. Whatever she does and says shows the elegance of simplicity. And simplicity is not only an element in her scholarship, but also a way of life. She and Dr. Tim Baker are lifetime partners in the ballroom dancing. And they have performed at a professional level for many decades. But I have never seen Sue wearing any fancy shoes. Sneakers and sandals are her favorite. And her favorite lunch is instant noodles, which costs about 20 cents and takes about 20 seconds to make. And the third element in Sue's scholarship is clarity. And the grace and beauty of clarity is in her thinking, her writing, and her talking. The ability to think through, to crystallize, and to express clearly is what makes Sue the great scholar, the excellent teacher, and the superb messenger. So no matter how complex the issue is, she is able to cut through the brush, get to the core, and grasp the issue with just a few simple words. That's what clarity means to me. So you can pretty much summarize her 400-something publications into 3 words: originality, simplicity, and clarity. Scholarship is part of what makes Sue Baker, but not the most important part. The most important part is the attributes that are unique to her, and to my frustration and almost despair, those attributes are not learnable or teachable. I would wish I have a mind as brilliant, as fast, as sharp as hers. I would wish I have her intuition and perception. I also wish I would possess the work ethic and the intense passion about what I do as she does. Unfortunately, those can only be wishes. I arrived in the BWI airport on a Saturday in August 1989. Sue picked me up at the airport and drove me directly to her office in the Hampton House and started working before I unpacked my luggage. And 22 years later, I do not think she has ever taken a day off from her work. As far as I know, she has always been working like a doctoral student, dashing to finish her thesis. So what's driving her to work so hard with such urgency and intensity? You may find the answer from her in this short video.
Early in my Master of Public Health Studies, I went down to Annapolis, the state capital, to hear Tim and other people giving testimony as to why we should have a law saying that people would be tested for alcohol if the police felt that that was justified. This was the early 1960s. It was pretty revolutionary then. We didn't have such a law. But I listened to people say, gee, 50,000 people a year are being killed on the road, and more than half of them are being killed because of alcohol, because somebody's drunk. And I thought, my gosh, 50,000 people a year, and there's nobody at the School of Public Health who's working on this problem? So that was a real wake-up moment for me.
Anastalin means in Amharic, may God give you good health. Tim and Sue, you look so young and just got married. I've been asked to condense 40 years of relationship into 5 minutes of what I'm supposed to say. I think I'm not really fulfilling what I say, but discipline is very important. My name is Ahmed Mawen, and I am originally from Ethiopia, but had been here for 40 years or more, a student forever of Dr. Baker. Today we are gathered here to honor Professors Sue and Tim Baker for their lifetime achievement. Together they open doors of opportunities for all citizens of the world. I have been asked to speak about Tim since I am fortunate to be one of his students. I think I have more gray hair than he has. Tim Baker has inspired and moved us to look at global issues with local solutions. To him, it was never a cannot do, a cannot find a solution. There is always something or someone who can find the key. Tim, you are the teacher that inspired thousands of students over the years to go forth and improve the quality of life in the world. In places I have been to, from Ethiopia, Yemen, Indonesia, Philippines, Egypt, Kuwait, and Africa, you and Susan are always mentioned when the topic of international health, traffic safety, and injury control are mentioned. You are icons in your own rights. A few decades ago, the first thing that Dr. Abdurrahman Al-Awadi, the former Minister of Health and a member of the Council of Ministers of Kuwait, said to this yours truly, a rookie consultant on behalf of Johns Hopkins University. He said, if Dr. Baker sent you, then you must be capable of doing a great job. That is how much trust that the World Health leaders that know Dr. Baker have on his pupils. He then said, Kuwait would not have the health manpower plan and staffing patterns of 13 hospitals, plus the first medical school that was opened in 1986 without Dr. Baker's guidance. Thank you very much for that. Tim may not remember this, but when my home country, Ethiopia, became a radical socialist state in 1974, he remembers the event but doesn't remember what he did for me. It coincided with the MPH graduation. I was in a dilemma and desperate about my future. As an American educated health professional who had served as a former National Director of Health Services in the demised imperial regime, I considered living in exile or endangering my family and myself by returning to Ethiopia against our will, meaning my wife and I. So I turned to my trusted mentor and advisor about my unpredictable future. He came through for me as always he did. He said, Ahmed, I have arranged for you visa extension as a temporary graduate assistant in the international at GHU. At that time, I taught the curriculum design and community health with many of my professors. A couple of days later, Tim had already contacted someone in the international office at Johns Hopkins. He requested an immediate extension of my visa as a graduate assistant. In response to his letters of recommendation, the INS contacted me and suggested that I apply for a status change. Within 60 days, very unusual, I received my permanent resident visa, and now I am a U.S. citizen. I bow for you. Thank you very much. Meanwhile, with his financial and moral support and guidance, I earned a doctoral degree thereafter in 1979. Tim, you are our lifelong mentor. When a friend is in need, you are a true friend indeed. I tell you this story about myself, but I know there are countless other students who have been helped in one way or another by Tim Baker. The Ethiopian public health delivery system has been greatly improved thanks to training its health leaders by Hopkins. The country owes a huge debt of gratitude to Tim Baker. In fact, I asked the new Minister of Health of the current government to send a proclamation to this effect and it should have been arrived by today. Unfortunately, you blame the mail, not me. I would have been honored to hand it over for you. Second slide. It looks like the second coming of Abe Lincoln to Hopkins. You know Jesus Christ, but lip honking. Okay. Tim, to this day, I still have a vivid picture in my mind of you walking around, looking much like Abraham Lincoln, yet you are remembered with your signature smile differently. My generation remember you as the smiling professor on the corridors of the 5th floor at the Stebbins Building. My generation of the 1970s will always remember you for your compassion, your sense of humor, which never left you, we saw that, and most of all, being our distinguished teacher. When you walk into his scattered office in the Stebbins Building, I don't know how many of you had been in that office, and look at his traditional collections, you will wonder how on earth he can find anything in it. The answer, of course, is because he has a photographic mind that can retrieve a book, a journal, and anything at will in that mess. Next, it's in Arabic, it says, قم للمعلم ووفه التبجيل كاد المعلم أن يكون رسولا, which means stand up for the master, honor him with praises, for he is a prophet, teach the divine phrases. What a description for you. Tim, on behalf of all the international health students, we are eternally grateful because you were the father who consoled us when we got lost. You were the voice of reason when we disagreed, and the mediator when we quarreled. We have a lot of quarrels among international students in the classroom. You could see him saying, I've been to all these places. Can you follow me and then tell me the truth? The wisdom that you imparted went beyond books and lectures. Finally, I would like to say thank you to the organizers of this event. No two people deserve this celebration more than Sue and Tim Baker. I would like also to say thank you to the rest of the A-team. I consider them the A-team in my generation in the Department of International Health. Namely, Bill Ranke, I think, is in the audience. Alan Sorkin is in the audience. Mel Thorne, he's in the audience. Bob Barker, who was with me in Jamaica, and he knows a lot of fun we had there. He asked me to prepare a breakfast, and I said, I'm good, I'll do you an omelette. So I put hot green sauce, and they have been, you know, where they have kept going back and forth the whole day. I would like also to recognize and remember our late Carl Taylor and Nancy Stevens, and I think, and many others who were our supporters and caring and loving people who supported us. And now that you have heard from a student of Tim's, you will hear from one of his colleagues and his department chair, Dr. Bob Black. Thank you very much.
Well, I also am very pleased that we can recognize the work of Tim and Sue Baker, and today I'd like to say a few words about Tim. A year ago, the department realized that Tim had been in the department for 50 years, and we decided we should have a celebration. And of course, Tim, in his humble way, said, "You're not going to recognize me just for being around for 50 years. We said, no, it's not that. It's not that you're planted here. We actually are recognizing the work that you did. And in fact, we had a very nice event, part celebration, part roast, and the faculty went on so long that Tim got no chance for a rebuttal. We actually had planned to have him speak, and we ran out of time, so we had another event where he could speak, and that also went very well. So, as Mike said, Tim came to the school as an assistant dean, and with Dean Stebbins then developed the funding from the predecessor organization to what is now U.S. Agency for International Development for the training program and for the work that the department was to do. This was the first grant to a school of public health, and it really was the founding of our department. It's not me. If I open my mouth, will it happen again? The creation of first the division and then ultimately the Department of International Health was really due to Tim's vision, and in fact this vision led to our department, in some ways the whole field of international health, as a separate area of study from public health and in fact to a department. And now there are many departments around the world called international health or global health, but this was the first, and we are celebrating our 50th anniversary. And we recognize that we may not all be here if it hadn't been for the vision that Tim had, that we really should be a separate area of study. Tim's work in health planning and in human resource development, previously called manpower studies, not politically correct anymore, but we can call it human resource development now, continues to really be central to the field of international health. As we've heard from Ahmed, Tim has been an inspiration to many students and graduates. I'm sure that the number he has advised, both formally and informally, and continued to mentor after their graduation, would be a record, perhaps only in competition with Sue. I'm not sure they've ever totaled them up, but I know they don't compete. But I think they both had an incredible contribution to many of our students and graduates. And these students themselves have made many important contributions and provided leadership in the field. And in the last half century, I think that is, again, a real accomplishment for Tim. And actually, it's Tim's quote that what I have accomplished is what my students have accomplished. I think we can say then that he has accomplished a great deal. I've learned a lot from Tim, including that we should value our history and the history of our department. And I guess his interest in history more broadly can be illustrated by his entry into Abraham Lincoln look-alike contest, which actually he has done. And I don't know if you won, Tim. You won. Yeah, all right. Yet another accomplishment. By his papers on the history of medicine and international health in the state of Maryland, by his 50-year collection of National Geographics, which may still be looking for a home, I'm told, and by the piles of documents in his office, some of which I am told go back to Lincoln's time as well. So when Tim gave his reflections at the department event, the second one where we allowed him to speak, he talked about his heroes. He talked about the history of the school during this 50-year period, the heroes of the school in his mind. And he also made a joke about how one young student once said that Tim was history, which we know is not really true. He's still making history. So in an era when there are many justifications we hear for the work we do internationally, global threats of infection, national security, U.S. economic interests, Tim has been most clear about why we do this work, why we try to influence the health of populations around the world. So I guess we'd like to hear it in his own words, so we have a short video.
International health in the early 60s was an area of great interest because of diplomacy. This was the time of the Cold War, and one of the important things was to reach out to the lower and middle income countries of the world and to both help them and politically to help us. Just as international health today is a growth industry, it was at the time. You know, it's interesting as I think about international health and why the U.S. taxpayer should support it, I think of President Kennedy, who in starting the Peace Corps said, we do this not because it will gain friends for the United States, not because it will gain us points in the Cold War, but because it is right. And I think that's what most Americans will resonate with. I don't think that they will see the advantages of creating markets in lower and middle income countries to receive our products. I think they will think, yes, this is right.
Hi, I'm Susie Baker, and I'm here to offer the child's eye view of my parents' careers. My first memories of their work life have to do with office supplies. These are from the old days when the School of Hygiene was a small rectangular building on Wolf Street. And from the name hygiene, I suspected that my father's work had something to do with washing your hands before dinner. Some Saturdays he'd bring us in to work with him. He'd do whatever adults did with all those papers, and my brothers and I would chase each other up and down the spooky, empty halls. When I tired of that, I liked nothing better than to sit in a big office chair and make necklaces of paper clips. I'm not sure that the wonderful secretaries of the Department of International Health, Nancy Stevens and Carol Buckley, were as fond of coming in to find their supplies tied into a chain. Things got more interesting when my mother went back to work as a computer programmer. She had boxes of those huge old computer programming cards, which could be stapled together, most notably to make Christmas wreaths, which could be spray painted gold. But those weren't the only perks of my parents' careers. There were also the yearly international health dinner parties down in the basement of the school, where everyone would come in national dress, bringing wonderful foods from around the world. My brother David clearly remembers penguin burgers on the menu, though sadly they'd always run out by the time we got there. And there were exciting trips to the other countries related to my father's work. I have to say that I suspect my parents sometimes regret that influence on our lives, as they've ended up with one child in Spain and one in Taiwan. And as to perks, I'm quite sure that there was nepotism involved when I got one of my first and most favorite jobs ever helping to train SEALs in Carlton Ray's lab down in the basement of the school. My first memory of seeing what my parents actually did was when my father had his book on health manpower in Taiwan published. It didn't look quite as much fun as Nancy Drew or the Hardy Boys, but still, it was a real book with his name on the cover. And my brother Dan says he spent hours on the kitchen floor preparing the titles for the graphs in that book with the Leroy lettering set. This was before home computers were even dreamed of. Then my mother was written up in People magazine, an issue I still have. At the time, she was working out of the medical examiner's office, and they have her quoted as saying, "I get some of my best ideas from dead bodies." I probably don't need to add that I always had the most unusual set of parents out of my group of friends. One of the unusual things about them is their ability to work so well together. As a psychologist, I don't actually believe that all that is needed to maintain a relationship is good communication. I think that the initial spark between two people is essential. They had the good luck to fall in love and the good sense to tend the fire over the years by supporting each other. Since my father encouraged my mother to go back to work, I have observed countless hours of them helping each other with ideas, editing, polishing each other's work, a collaboration I'm sure made each of their research richer. And it's a gift they've shared. I'm not the only one in this room who has had a paper taken apart and revised by one or both of them. It wasn't my favorite activity at the time, but it's one that served me well. It taught me how to enjoy writing. As I grew up, I realized with some surprise that us three kids weren't the only people they patiently listened to or gave support and guidance to. Over the years, I have appreciated and enjoyed hearing their stories about the students they're working with. I see that contact and support of their students as one of their major accomplishments. The other contribution I'm proud of is their commitment to making the world a healthier and safer place. Sorry, guys. It's a task that seems more and more difficult in today's complex world political scene. I'm happy that we have examples of people like my parents and their colleagues who continue to work to help others, even in challenging circumstances. So I'll close with one more early memory. This is supposed to be a joke, but I'll probably cry at this one too. This is of a cartoon that my father had taped to one of his file cabinets for many years. It's a picture of a tired-looking man leaning over an open file drawer. Down inside the bottom of the drawer is a bottle of whiskey. On the front label of the drawer it said, "Seize, from courage to continue." And that courage to continue is what they've offered each other and so many of us over the years. Thank you.
Well, that's not an easy act to follow. My name is Steve Terrett, and I have the incredible pleasure of knowing both Sue and Tim for, I believe it's 33 years now. So I think that what all of us who are speaking, who have the privilege of speaking here, are struggling, trying to best articulate is what makes Sue and Tim so very, very special. I think we all agree, everyone in the audience agrees that Sue and Tim, I was told to be sure that I stayed behind the podium. What makes Sue and Tim so very, very special? We all agree that they are, but putting your finger on it is difficult. So my good friend, Dr. Afua Lee, suggested when talking about Tim, when talking about Sue, but the same would be true for Tim, that maybe it's the work ethic, that your immense work ethic here in the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health is unique, but that would do a disservice to the other faculty members and students. And I'm sure that everybody remembers the time long ago when Sue and Tim both walked into a bar, each one carrying about a foot-high stack of papers that were journal articles that you had not read yet, and papers of your students that you were going to grade, and each one of them, oddly enough, had on his or her shoulder a bright green frog. And the bartender looks at them as they come in and says, well, that's unusual. I've never seen anything like that before. Where did you get them? To which the frogs replied, Hopkins, they're all over the place. So it is a tribute to you how hard you work, but it's a tribute to all of the faculty how hard you work. So what then is it about Sue and Tim that is extra special? I think one of the things is, and again, Alpha, you alluded to this, it's the way that you think. You think in a special way, even for the brilliant professors in the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. So let me just give you two very quick illustrations of this. A family in 1959 in Syracuse, New York, sits down for dinner. The family is made up of mother, father, two children. They're having for dinner boiled potatoes, string beans out of a can, some salad with no dressing on it, and steak that they're going to grill on a barbecue. They have their dinner. Within a very short period of time, all four of them get seriously ill, gastrointestinal illness. Ultimately, they recover. It's reported to the health department in Syracuse, which is where you were working, Tim. And the question is, what was it that made them ill? This is like the Epi-1 problem, except with different food. Was it the boiled potato? No, it's just boiled potatoes. Was it canned string beans? Something I remember well from New York in the 1950s. No, it wasn't. It wasn't the canned string beans. Was it the beverage that they had? No, because the parents each had a beer and the children each had a soft drink. The salad? No. The steak? No, the steak was just recently bought and it had been refrigerated until they ate it. So what could it be? Along comes Tim Baker to answer the question. The father had put together the grill for grilling the steak, and for the what he put on top of the fire was a rack from the refrigerator in the kitchen, and the intensity of the fire, the heat of the fire, melted the cadmium on the grill, and they all suffered cadmium poisoning, from which they fortunately recovered. You can find this in a paper published by Timothy D. Baker in 1961 in Public Health Reports. But talk about thinking outside of the box. Who would think people get horrible gastrointestinal illness after eating a meal, all four of them? Who would think that it would be melting cadmium from the refrigerator rack? In a similar way, Sue Baker has seen things that other people just don't see, public health issues of enormous importance. I had the enormous privilege of coming to the School of Public Health, and unlike Barry Pless, I did get to sit at the feet of Sue Baker, and I'm the better person for it in ways that I can never fully describe to you. But let me give you just one example. People knew that children were dying in car crashes, and Dean Clagg mentioned this, but Dean Clagg left out some of the details about this. So people were dying, children especially, were dying in car crashes. They would group the deaths of occupants of cars dying in car crashes in 5-year intervals. So Sue knew what the death rate was for people 0 to 5. This is not good enough for Sue Baker to know what the death rate is for people 0 to 5. So Sue somehow, with her persuasive power, you should have been a lawyer, Sue, with her persuasive powers, convinced the federal government to give her a computer tape which contained the data for each individual death. She broke down the death rates first by individual years, but let's remember still, this is Sue Baker, then came breaking it down by months, and found that the highest death rate for children was children under 6 months of age, something that had been totally masked and unknown because of the previous grouping by 5 years. With that data, and again, this is quintessential Sue Baker, with that data, she not only reported the data so people knew who was at highest risk, but she asked the question, what can and should be done with regard to that kind of problem? And that's how child restraint laws throughout the 50 states became passed in an incredible short period of time, an amazing diffusion of innovation, legal innovation, in this sense, that from the first law to be passed in the state of Tennessee, it was just a matter of 7 or 8 years until such laws were passed in all of the states in the United States, including the District of Columbia. And the passage of those laws was based in large part on the data that Sue provided and the persuasive argument that Sue provided that it's the smallest of children who are at the greatest of risk and they deserve some kind of protection. So it's this unusual way of thinking that characterizes both Sue and Tim. But actually, when I was trying to figure out what should I say, coming at the end of this, what should I say about Sue and Tim, it wasn't until yesterday that I think I really came upon what truly is the most wonderful part of you. I was driving to work. I was playing a CD of classical music. I've been a fan of classical music for a very long time, since I was a teenager. And when I was a teenager, first becoming acquainted with classical music, I thought the way teenagers do. I thought about classical music roughly the same way that I thought about the Brooklyn Dodgers, who I also liked. And so I thought, all right, what's the best piece of classical music? Who's the best composer? It wasn't until years later that I realized that you don't think about who's the best composer or what's the best piece of classical music, that there are different types of classical music. So I would ask myself, what's the most perfect piece of classical music? And I could answer my questions that I asked myself in a very subjective way. Well, the most perfect piece of classical music would be the Bach Chaconne for violin as transcribed by Brahms for the piano for the left hand only. Or what's the most wonderful piece of music? Well, it's the fourth movement of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Or what's the most ethereal piece of music? Well, that would be the, I would say the end, the Liebestod in Wagner's Tristan and Isolde. But with all that categorization, this is the kind of categorization people like epidemiologists like you. I remember once Sue came back from a weekend at their summer place and said, I saw 13 wild turkeys, 8 male, 5 female. But in all of this categorization, what I realized, what I was missing is, for classical music, what piece of classical music was written for me? What is my piece of classical music? And I have an answer for that too. For me, it's the Rachmaninoff Second Piano Concerto. For all of you, it would be something else. But the reason that I tell you all about this is transfer this to professors in the School of Public Health. So yeah, we could have contests about who is the professor who has the greatest number of peer-reviewed publications. I don't know which one of you it is. Who's the professor who has the biggest grant in the history of the school? Who's the professor who's won the most golden apple? We can categorize that. But for me, the most important thing is for people to ask themselves, who's my professor? Who's the professor who speaks to me directly? For me, I've been very fortunate that I have two answers for that. It's Sue and Tim Baker. But that's not important that you're my professor. What's important is that go around the world, as people have already told you, as Mike told you, as Bob told you, go around the world and ask the alumni of this school, who is your professor, the one who speaks to you? And it's Sue and Tim Baker. And what greater accolade can an academic have than being the professor for people all around the world? So thank you very much, Sue and Tim Baker. We're now ready. Are you still out there? Oh, yes. We're now ready to unveil the portrait, and unfortunately the artist has been caught in plane traffic, but we have something as good as the artist herself, who are the artist's parents. Thank you.
Yes, my daughter's late. All right. I'm Jeanette Agley, and I'm speaking on behalf of my daughter Ingrid, whose flight was delayed. She very much wanted to be here, and so I promise I will read her comments to you. She might just come any moment, but anyway, she is in town, but in a taxi. And I am now Ingrid Agley. My name is Ingrid Agley, and I'm a third-generation portrait painter. When I approach the painting of a new portrait, it is my job to assess the spirit of the individual I paint and capture it on canvas. From my first meeting, I could see that the Bakers are the kind of people that always put others before themselves. Every time I saw Tim, for example, he brought me a lovely violet wrapped in tin foil. In fact, if you look very carefully at the left pocket of Tim's coat in the painting, you can actually see one of the little violets right there. I wanted the painting to be about love, specifically two people in love who made, through careers, children, and sickness and so forth, still remain committed and in equal partnership. The Bakers have a quality in their relationship that is secure, loving, and kind. This spills over to their peers, their students, and all those around them. Whether it is Sue looking at how to improve the safety for kids, or Tim finding a scholarship for a student in need, it is about them looking outside of themselves to help others. I see that for the Bakers. Giving of themselves is in huge supply. Their cup runneth over, and I can see this is one of the reasons for their great success. This is what I wanted to capture in the painting, and this is what I feel was extremely important for them to leave behind as a visual gift for the next generation here at the Bloomberg School of Public Health. Thank you, Tim and Sue, for allowing me to get to know you and to do my best to capture your beautiful spirits on canvas. And thank you, Dean Clegg, for your efforts in making this portrait a reality and for the honor of painting Tim and Sue. And with that, I shall unveil the portrait.
want to thank Ingrid and her parents, everybody here in this room, of course. This has just been an amazing day for both of us. You've heard a lot about all the people that Tim has mentored and encouraged and so on. Nobody mentioned me, but the reason I am here rather than sitting up there with you is just the fact that Tim got me into this field in the first place. I think it happened when I wanted to exempt a course in chronic disease that was being taught by Abe Lilienfeld, and he said that if I did a paper on chronic disease, I didn't have to take the course. I'd been computer programming for his department, and of course I thought I knew everything. But at any rate, here was a chance to spend an academic quarter doing something that of my own choice, and I couldn't think what to do, and I thought about pancreatic cancer and COPD and various chronic health problems. Nothing really turned me on, and one day Tim said, what are you worried about? And I said, well, it's a wonderful opportunity, but I feel like an accident looking for a place to happen. and Tim said, well, you know, I think you've always been interested in accidents. Why don't you do a paper on accidents and chronic diseases? And I did, and the rest is history. Of course, a lot of people have said, does this occasion mean that you and Tim are retiring? Well, we've discussed that. And we figured, actually, we think we've each got another 50 years in us for another century. And our question for you is, what are you going to do then for us?
I'd like to thank, first of all of my friends, students, old friends, new friends, and colleagues, and delighted to see you all here. It's really wonderful. I'd also like to thank the first people that we see when we come into the school, the security forces, greeting us with friendship, the last people we see when we leave, and the people who have prevented any major disturbances in the school for the time I've been here. I'd like to thank the maintenance men who maintain a complex and viable school and keep us going. I'd like to thank the cleaning staff who make this a school of hygiene. And then to this event, I'd like to thank Monique and Christina. I am amazed at how much work it takes to put something like this on. I'd like to thank Ellen and Bob Black, and most of all, Mike Clegg, for thinking of this and for pulling it off. It's wonderful. Now, we've heard a lot of nice things said about us in this session, and those that have been said about Sue are absolutely true. Now, as far as I'm concerned, maybe a lot of this is fiction, which brings me to the talking dog from West Texas. The students have maybe heard this before, but I don't think a lot of the faculty have. There was this motorist who was driving through West Texas, and he saw a sign out, talking dog for sale. He thinks, oh, this is some joke, but he stops and says, I'll go back and see what it is. He goes up to the house, old guy sitting on the porch, and he said, I understand you have a talking dog for sale. The man said, he's out back. So the guy walks around, and there's this average-looking dog, and he says, so you're a talking dog? The dog says, yes, I'm a talking dog. I've been able to talk ever since I was a puppy, and I can understand human speech. The State Department heard about this, and they took me out, and when they had international meetings, I would hang around their other participants and report back to my masters, and it gave them a great advantage in the negotiations. Well, you know that jet lag is hard on a dog, so I got out of this business and went down to the Tex-Mex border, where I worked with the customs people. I would stand by the line and hear people say, "Do you think they'll find that marijuana in this false bottom of my suitcase? Do you think that they will find those diamonds hidden in the heels of my shoes?" And I'd report back to my masters, and they'd nab them like that. Well, then I found a mate. We had a couple of litters, and now I'm just retired here. The motorist is blown away. He just can't believe it. So he goes around to the guy and says, how much do you want for that talking dog? The old guy says, $15. The motorist can't help himself. He says, $15 for that wonderful dog? Why so low? The old guy says, the dog's a damn liar. He never done none of that shit.
Took you 2 years to get it out, but okay. So, well, I want to make clear this portrait is a gift from the school and from the Department of Health Policy and Management and the Department of International Health to all the students and the faculty. And it's going to hang downstairs. We're starting a portrait row. So you're going to have a place right across from the Anna Baker room. And so everybody who walks down that hall will see it. I also want to thank you for, I noticed you wore the exact same outfits that's in the portrait, so that's what I said. So we'll get a picture later, and we'll be able to see if people can tell which was a real and which is a portrait. And thank you for thanking Monique Forbes Dickerson and Christina Pham Linhoff for all their work on this, and I want to thank everybody who made it such a special day. So we're going to have a reception where you can talk to the whole Baker family. I want to thank Susie for coming so far, especially too, down in the Feinstone. So please, one last round of applause for the Baker.